Hi everyone. This is the lecture to accompany Chapter 8 in your textbook. Make sure you read Chapter 8 carefully. Understanding this part of speech creation is very important. Okay, let's talk about organizing and outlining your speech. Back in Chapter 1, we discussed the 5 canons of rhetoric, one of which is arrangement. This has to do with how to organize your speech so that you most effectively get your ideas across to the audience. A well-organized speech keeps you on track as well. This chart shows the different parts of a speech. You already know that every speech has an introduction, body, and conclusion. Another essential component we'll talk about is transitions, which help you move smoothly from one part of the speech to the next. We will also discuss the functions of introductions and conclusions in the next chapter. But in this chapter, we're going to focus on organizing and outlining the body of the speech. You might be thinking, why are we starting the organization process with the body? Why don't you just start at the beginning? Well, there are several reasons for that. The body is the largest part of the speech where the majority of the information and supporting material will go. It's actually where you accomplish the purpose of your speech, where you inform or persuade the audience, where you develop, support, and explain your main points. Frankly, in order to make sure your introduction leads well into the body of the speech, you need to know what will be in the body of the speech. In Chapter 9, we'll discuss how to begin and end the speech. For now, though, let's concentrate on the speech body. You need to focus on making sure your main points fulfill your specific purpose and are verbalized in your thesis. And you'll need to start developing them, making sure they're clear, relevant, and balanced. You should have a working outline at this point. Remember that? It consists of your topic, specific purpose statement, and thesis, and some potential main points. Look at them. They need to be clear, relevant, and balanced. What does that mean? Well, they should identify and clarify what your speech is about. They should pertain directly to your topic, and they should be at least somewhat balanced in terms of importance and time spent on them. They should also be effectively organized. When you created your introduction speech, I talked about a few ways you could organize your main points. Now we'll see that there are lots of ways you can organize them, depending on your general purpose, your specific purpose, and your topic. There are lots of structural patterns you can use to help lead the audience through your information. These are the most common ones: chronological, spatial, topical, narrative, cause and effect, problem solution, and Monroe's motivated sequence. Let's look at each of them individually. The chronological speech pattern is based on how something happens, develops, or occurs in time. This pattern is mostly used for informative speeches and is very good for recounting the history of a topic, like the history of how golf developed, explaining how something happens, like what happens to cause a volcano to erupt, or demonstrating a step-by-step process, like how to make an origami frog. Here's an example of the main points of a speech about the development of the World Wide Web. So think about your topic. Do the main points fall naturally into a chronological pattern? In the spatial pattern, the main points have to do with where things are. If your speech has to do with describing an object or a place, or explaining how something is designed or laid out, then the spatial pattern could work for you. This example is about strange and unique tourist landmarks in the United States going from east to west. This pattern is almost always used for informative speeches. The topical pattern is a very common one, mostly for informative speeches, but also for persuasive. It takes a general topic and divides it into fairly equal subtopics that address its components, elements, or aspects. In this example of a speech about what you can learn about people by observing them as they play golf, the speaker breaks what you can learn about them into 3 subtopics: how they handle unexpected events, how patient they are, and how much concern they show for others. If you were going to use this topical pattern for a persuasive speech, you could talk about 3 important reasons why the audience should do or not do something. In the narrative pattern, which is almost always used for informative speeches, you structure your main point in story form. It can either be one long story where each main point is another part of the narrative, or something like this, where you tell several stories about the topic, in this case, the boardwalk in Atlantic City. This one is not only narrative but also chronological, as the stories take place in consecutive time periods: 1870, 1920, World War II, and 1976. Cause and effect pattern is based on the idea that one action or a series of actions leads to something else. In other words, something causes something else to happen. This is a good structure for both informative and persuasive speeches. If it's an informative speech, you're not trying to prove that one thing caused or causes another thing. You're just explaining that something does cause something else to happen, as in this first example about meditation. However, in the second example, the speaker is attempting to prove that one of the causes of homelessness is the limited educational opportunities that some people are afforded due to inequities in our educational system. Most of the time, these speeches have two main points, one dealing with the cause and one dealing with the effect. A pattern that is almost always used for persuasive speeches is the problem-solution pattern. The first main point describes a particular problem. Then the second main point outlines a potential solution or course of action that could be taken to address that problem. In this example, the first main point talks about the financial problems caused by a school's football program, and the second point attempts to show that the best solution is to eliminate the football program. There's also an organizational pattern that the book doesn't address here. It's called the problem-cause-solution pattern. It's a combination of cause-effect and problem-solution. This is a great pattern for a persuasive speech in which it's important not just to know the problem, but also its cause, so the solution makes more sense and will be easier to accept. In the example here, the first main point details the problem, which is that there are very few large fish left in the oceans. The second main point outlines the cause, which is overfishing by several nations. Then the third main point talks about what different entities and individuals can do to help fix the problem. Finally, Monroe's motivated sequence is a particular type of persuasive organizational pattern. It's designed to motivate an audience to take some kind of action. There are 5 steps involved in this pattern. First, gain the audience's attention. Second, establish the need for something or the existence of a problem. Third, satisfy that problem. Fourth, help the audience to visualize an outcome. And fifth, move the audience to action. I'm not going to go into more detail here, although you should read about this pattern in the textbook. Towards the end of the semester, many of you will be doing this kind of speech, and I have some videos and examples that will explain it further. Figure 8.3 in the textbook shows how you could create 7 different speeches on a single topic. In the case of the illustration, it's voting, by using different organizational patterns for main points. The pattern you choose to use for any given speech depends on the topic, the general purpose, the specific purpose, and the thesis. Once you understand what exactly you're trying to get across to your audience, you should be able to see that one particular organizational pattern would be best. You can always ask me if you're not sure. Good speeches aren't just lists of information. It's not the audience's job to take that information and try to put it together to make sense. It's your job. Good speeches have coherence and an obvious connection between their component parts, and that's where transitions come in. They help lead your audience from one part of the speech to the next, connecting the ideas together into a coherent whole. While you will use different types of transitional words and phrases throughout your speech, they are particularly important in 3 specific areas: when you move from the introduction of the speech into the first main point in the body, as you move from one main point to the next, and when you're finished with the body material, you need a transition into the conclusion. A speech without transitions feels and sounds kind of jumpy and is often confusing as the audience struggles to figure out exactly where the speaker is in the speech. But if you connect your ideas using transitions, the speech will flow smoothly and the audience will know where you are in the speech. The book gives excellent examples of the different kinds of transitions you would use at particular places in the speech, so make sure you read it. Back in Chapter 4, we discussed the working outline, and you should already have one for your upcoming informative speech. It's the thing that helps you through the initial phases of speech development, identifying the topic, general purpose, specific purpose, thesis statement, and some possible main points. Once you have that, and you've done your research, then you're ready for the next stage in the speech development process, creating your complete sentence outline. This outline is the one you type up and submit to me in the speech assignment Dropbox. It clearly identifies all the parts of the speech and all pieces of information for the speech, including your references. It puts your ideas in order and fleshes them out with supporting material and transitions, and it uses complete sentences for the majority of the outline. The speaking outline, which is discussed here in the chapter, but I'm going to go into more detail about it in Chapter 12, is basically the same thing as speaking notes. These are the notes you create from the complete sentence outline in a way that you can refer comfortably and precisely to your information, present it in a clear and organized way, while still engaging your audience personally and professionally during the speech. You'll write this outline on note cards and use keywords and phrases instead of complete sentences. But as I said, I'll discuss that more in Chapter 12. Okay, so let's focus on the complete sentence outline. I like to say it's your ideal speech written in outline form. Why do you have to write it as an outline? Why can't you just write it out like a manuscript? Well, it's because a good speech has to have certain things in it and be organized in a particular way, and if you just write it out, there's no guarantee that it's going to follow the format that's needed. So let's see what needs to be in your complete sentence outline. First, you need to preface the outline with the identifying information of your speech, which includes your topic, your specific purpose, and your thesis. Then you need your introduction labeled and written out completely. We'll discuss in the next chapter the specific functions that your introduction needs to fulfill. Then you need to list your main points in order, stating them in complete sentences. Within each one of those main points, you'll need subpoints and sub-subpoints, and in some cases even sub-sub-subpoints. Don't worry, it's not as complicated as it sounds. You will need to maintain these levels of importance within each main point. Use consistent symbols and indent properly, subordinating the ideas that support the main point. Make sure you don't have too many main points, subpoints, or sub-subpoints. You'll also need to include and label any transitions you use in the appropriate places. Then your conclusion needs to be labeled and written out completely. And you'll need a bibliography on the last page, listing all the sources you cite in your speech. Did that sound confusing? Well, let me help you by showing you an example of a complete sentence outline. Here's an outline for an informative speech about how to make a cheesecake. The topic, specific purpose, and thesis are all labeled and written out here. The topic is Grandma's cheesecake. The specific purpose to teach my audience how to make my grandma's cheesecake recipe, and the thesis, by using the correct materials and following Grandma's secret recipe, anyone can turn this delicious cheesecake into their very own creation. Then you label the introduction and write it out in its entirety. In the next chapter, we'll discuss what needs to be in the introduction, but suffice it to say that everything that needs to be here is here. Now I need a transition to get from the introduction into the body, so I label it, write it out, put it in parentheses, and there it is. So that's the first part of my complete sentence outline. Now, before I get into the body of the outline for the cheesecake speech, I want to talk about how the body of your speeches is going to be formatted. It's going to look something like this. It goes from Roman numerals to capital letters to regular Arabic numerals to small letters. All main points are complete sentences, and they're identified by Roman numerals, and they sit at the left margin of the page. All subpoints, which are usually supporting material of some sort and are also complete sentences, are indented one level and identified by capital letters. All sub-subpoints, which are a further breakdown of your idea and may or may not be a complete sentence, these are indented 2 levels and identified by Arabic or regular numbers. And if you need to break information down to the sub-sub-subpoint level, it would be identified by a small letter and probably not be a complete sentence. Okay, let's see how this looks in your actual outline. Okay, so we're back at the cheesecake speech. After the transition, I would put my first main point, which is identified with the Roman numeral 1. In order to prepare my grandmother's cheesecake, you need to gather the proper materials. Now, here's where I start to organize my information. I hope you can see that I'm using a chronological pattern here, which is the best pattern for a demonstration or process speeches like this. In this case, this main point is broken down into 2 subpoints. Subpoint A, which has to do with the ingredients, and subpoint B, which has to do with the equipment. Let's look at subpoint A. Make sure you have all the necessary ingredients. Any ingredient for this recipe will be listed as sub-subpoints, and in this case, sub-sub-subpoints. What I've done here is divided them into wet ingredients, which is sub-subpoint 1, and dry ingredients, which is sub-subpoint 2. Then under wet ingredients, I list them as sub-sub-subpoints A, B, C, and D. And under subpoint 2, the dry ingredients are A and B. I did that to show you how far you can break the information down. As I said, you would probably never need to go into more detail than that, and mostly you probably wouldn't need to get past the sub-subpoint level, as in subpoint B, where I list the equipment. Then, of course, I need another transition to move from the first main point to the second one. Now I'm at my second main point, labeled with the Roman numeral 2. The next step is preparing the cheesecake. I've broken this down into 5 subpoints, which is about the maximum number of subpoints you want. Subpoint A is about preheating the oven. Subpoint B is about making the filling, and that has 4 sub-subpoints detailing each step in that process. Subpoint C discusses pouring the filling into the crust. Subpoint D has to do with baking, and there are 2 sub-subpoints about that part of the process. And finally, subpoint E, about taking the cheesecake out and cooling it. As you can see, some of the subpoints needed to be broken down further, others did not. Then I need to transition into the final main point, which is right there. Here's my third main point, labeled as Roman numeral 3. Some people like their cheesecake plain, but according to the article 10 Cheesecake Toppings on the website soufflebombay.com, there are any number of toppings you can use to make it unique. As you can see, when I cite a source, I need to write it into the text of the body of my speech so I don't forget it, just the way I would say it in the speech. Under this main point, I have 4 subpoints. The only one that's broken down into sub-subpoints is A. The others are single sentences that don't need any further detail. Now I'm done with the body of my speech, but I need a final transition to move smoothly from the body into the conclusion. Now I need to label my conclusion and write it out completely, so here it is. This conclusion has all the elements a good conclusion needs, which we will talk about in the next chapter. Now I've put the bibliography on this slide, but you'd put it on a separate page. You will need to format it in either APA or MLA. This is MLA, so the bibliography is labeled Works Cited. Then I put my 3 sources in alphabetical order, formatted correctly. My first source is the personal interview I did with Grandma. My second source is the 10 Cheesecake Toppings article that I cited. And the third source is the Shonda Rhimes cheesecake quote. The cheesecake speech outline is in this Canvas module, so you can download it and look at it. Your outline should be similarly formatted. If you have questions or need help, I'd be glad to assist you, and the CommLab tutors are always willing to help. Okay, you're ready to head over to MindTap.